you all for coming out tonight. We appreciate it very much. This is we're doing a tour of Montreal and surrounding regions, and then our next event is planned for out in Hudson. So hope to see some of you there, or encourage your friends to go. That'll be lovely. Okay. I did want to say thank you again for coming out. We are the Canadian Party of Quebec in association with the movement for staying Canadian. Can everyone hear me well? No.
I didn't bring my hammer.
Speak loud.
Well, Tech Man's in the back, so he can raise the volume. Okay, thank you. All right. So, just to begin with, these are important times, and your presence here is a testament to how important that coming together for the rights of people and a just society is. Tonight, there will be a few short speeches by the presenters here, and then we'll have time for questions after. We'll have a little town hall question period. Okay? So again, my name is Jonathan Gray, and I've been a member of the Canadian Party since very early in 2022. I ran as a candidate in Robert Baldwin, which is not far from here. And now I'm a member of the Board of Directors and President of the West Island Executive Committee. I also am a shadow critic for the educational system. That being said, most of us agree and recognize that the education system in Quebec is in need of serious restructuring. We currently suffer with unequal distribution of resources, overpopulated French schools, and thinning English schools. Bills 101, 96 are to blame along with the nationalist government. Improving the education system in Quebec requires a multifaceted approach, focusing on modernizing teaching practices and ensuring inclusivity for both French and English communities. We strongly support and would implement an effective bilingual system. Bilingual education plays a crucial role in Quebec's identity and global competitiveness. We must enhance bilingual programs, ensuring that students become fluent in both English and French. Preserving the French language is important in maintaining Quebec's cultural heritage, but this must not be done while marginalizing English and minority-speaking communities. A balanced approach is necessary, promoting French while supporting English educational rights. The educational curriculum must also see a return of important skill sets, the development of critical thinking, for the development of critical thinking members of society. We seek to reintroduce the home economics program, increase the importance of vocational and trade programs, return to critical thinking, understanding how money and taxes work, starting a business, strong digital literacy as well. Lastly, the controversial Bill 40, since we're in a school, we might as well mention it. The Bill 40, which limits schools' governance and autonomy in school boards, must be re-examined. By empowering local communities and educators, this will foster innovation and responsiveness for regional needs. There's much more that I could say, but the rest of it's on our platform, on the website, so you're welcome to check the rest there. Now I'd like to introduce our next presenter. It was going to be Liz Campbell, but Jo Chiam-Cloning will speak on her behalf, and she is the president of the Canadian Party. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you, Jonathan. So, Liz Campbell is our esteemed president. This party does not exist without Liz Campbell. So what I'd like to do is read the speech that she prepared for tonight. We've been preparing for this event for a while, and Liz was really excited to be here. But yesterday, late in the day, Liz got a call, and she was able to get an appointment with a medical specialist today. Most of you live in Quebec, so you realize, unfortunately, the choice was either attend the event we've been planning 4 months, or wait another 6 months for a serious health issue and attention to it. So, regrettably, what's that?
Did she buy a lottery ticket?
I hope so. So Liz couldn't be here with us tonight, but in this speech you'll see a number of times she asks for us to use our imagination. So I'll ask you to stretch it a little bit more as I read this speech pretending I'm Liz. Bonjour, hi, welcome everyone. My name is Liz Campbell, and I am the president of the Canadian Party of Quebec. And we do wish you was here with us tonight. Thank you for being with us tonight, and Happy New Year. This new year is starting off on a turbulent political footing. We'll be going to the polls at least twice, if not 3 times. Justin Trudeau has resigned and prorogued Parliament. Donald Trump has been inaugurated. He's threatening to annex Canada to America by using economic force. François Legault has called for a by-election in Quebec. We currently have 3 separatist sovereignist parties and 4 nationalist parties in the Quebec National Assembly. Yes, the Liberal parties of Quebec are nationalists. They are pandering for the French vote and have thrown Anglophones under the bus. Now I'll add a few words of mine here. I actually don't believe this is the French vote. I think this is the nationalist and separatist vote, not the Francophone vote. But it's a dominance of narrative in our media that it's up to us to break. And let me add a little bit more to Liz's speech here, because it's getting actually quite concerning. Right now, all parties are falling over themselves to be the one to introduce a Quebec constitution. Without getting into all the legal detail that matters, Section 90 being, basically struck for Section 45, which relies on the unanimous vote of 41, yada yada. The point is, provinces have domain over their own constitution under the supreme law of this country, the Constitution Act. However, a constitution at a provincial level is not defined. So this is a nonsense, legal, but it's a nonsense that's been very profitable and played down the middle by our provincial government here. And the attempt now to establish a constitution, in fact what's becoming Pablo Rodriguez's #1 platform point to bring to the Liberal Party of Quebec, will effectively eliminate Canadian rights in Quebec. You might think you're a Canadian, but once Quebec has control of the constitution, there is no ability for the Canadian government to intervene. No ability for the Canadian government to actually enforce the supreme law of this land, the Constitution Act. Not that they've been willing to do so anyways. But it will be a legal impossibility at that point. That's what's at stake and not being talked about in our politics.
What?
So,
we are Canadian.
so that's an aside for me. Let's get back to being Liz for now. But we will get to that, absolutely. So throughout all this turmoil, throughout all these nationalist parties, we also have PSPP still talking about a provincial referendum. So Liz would like to take us back to the future. She wants us to use our imaginations for a few minutes. Imagine living in a province where you can get health care in the language of your choice. Imagine living in a province where you can have your children, your grandchildren educated in the language of your choice without a certificate of eligibility and graduating bilingually no matter what school they choose. Imagine living in a province where your religious rights and cultural differences are respected and celebrated. Imagine living in a province where all neighbors are getting along, no matter what language you speak or where you're from. We are all immigrants to Canada. Sound familiar? It should, because that is the way we were in the past, and before Legault and his henchmen took office, even the recent past. Now let me take one step further. Imagine living in a province where you no longer hear about separation or sovereignty. Imagine never having to worry about your retirement portfolio or your housing value declining 70% for those of you who might remember the 90s, the 70s before those. Imagine living in a province where the feelings of anxiety and worry are no longer here because we no longer have to hear about this divisionism day after day. Finally, imagine living in a province that is proud to be part of the Canadian Federation and leads it instead of constantly agitates it. Where you can say, je suis fier Québécois, fier Montréalais, mais avant tout, above all, I am a proud Canadian. Are you? Are we? Folks, this is why we're gathering here tonight. We do not want to be American. We do not want to be French. We do not want to separate from Canada. We want to stay Canadian. So how can this happen? Is it a pipe dream? This party doesn't believe so. The following speakers will talk to you about the various elements and portfolios they work on to ensure this does happen. Firstly, we'll have Colin Standish, who's a co-party leader, outgoing, and founder of the Task Force on Linguistic Policy. Murtis Fossey is also a co-party leader, clinical psychologist based here in Ville-Saint-Laurent, and our former candidate in that jurisdiction. Also the official health critic of the party. Jonathan Gray will also take the mic, former candidate in Robert Baldwin, and our education critic, president, as he mentioned, of the Regional West Island Association for the party. Keith Henderson will make a few remarks, former leader of the Equality Party, board member of the Canadian Party of Quebec, and expert on staying Canadian. And no one ever writes this down, but I'll give him the credit for it. The person who actually developed the Clarity Act that the Liberals like to take credit for, about 10 years before they passed it into law, 3 years too late, Let's remember it, because we're repeating that decade right now. And finally, there's this other guy, Joe, who might say a few words at the end to moderate a few things. Who's also a co-founder of the party and a co-founder of the Task Force on Linguistic Policy. So with that, I look forward to handing the mic over to these speakers, and really after that, about 15 or 20 minutes of speeches, moderating a discussion amongst ourselves. That's what we're here for. We want to hear from you. We want to hear what you're seeing, what your experiences are. Et surtout, s'il y a aussi des Français dans la salle, on est tous bilingues, on est ici pour partager nos points de vue. Les éléments et les moments déclencheurs sont ici. On a besoin de créer un Québec uni et fort ensemble. Alors, s'il vous plaît, n'hésitez pas. So with that, let me pass the mic over to Colin. Thank you.
Buddy. Colin Standish, co-leader and one of the founders of the Canadian Party of Quebec. It's nice to see so many people here on that very snowy winter night. I remember getting off the crowded streetcar, nearly being shoved out as suited bankers, lawyers, associated professionals barreled out the doors at the corner of King and Bay Streets in Toronto. The first building looming high above the hustle and bustle was First Canadian Place, the headquarters of Bank BMO, the Bank of Montreal. Walking into my office, I remember my supervisor, originally from Beaconsfield, jokingly jostling another worker in the same building. We both went to LCC, Lower Canada College, together, my boss explained, their relationship previously unknown to me. The partner at my firm, as well, I worked for, was from the Eastern Townships, and his wife, too, originally a Quebecer. You know, we both saw the writing on the wall, he once said to me. At last count, I have 33 blood relatives in the Golden Horseshoe, which is the Greater Toronto and Hamilton area, stretching from Oshawa to St. Catharines. And if I count their spouses and children, it'd be several multiples higher. How many relatives do I have in the Greater Montreal area? Let's say from Blainville to Brossard, St. Lazare to St. Bruno. 0. It felt dystopian. In the heart of downtown Toronto, I was surrounded by other English-speaking Quebecers and institutions formerly in Montreal. Some irony that I never felt more like a Quebecer. This demographic, economic, and institutional shift across Canada has persisted for almost 50 years. In the Eastern Townships, of course, where I hail from, I do have numerous relatives, of course, but my paternal family, it seems, skipped over Montreal as it lost its economic status in the 1960s and as linguistic and independence debates gripped Quebec in the 1970s. At Christmas in Ontario or BC, around the dinner table, I found myself starting conversation with distant relatives with expressions English speakers find themselves repeating with the same frequency as "pass the turkey," "more mashed potatoes, please," and "grace over the holidays." Such as, "When did you leave Quebec?" "What part of Montreal are you from?" "Where in the Eastern Townships is your cottage?" We often speak in Quebec about the children of Bill 101, those who came of age post-1976 and attended, generally forcibly, French language schools, held up as models for a new French predominant and increasingly French only, under Bill 96, Quebec, of integration, success, and acculturation, or more accurately, if we were to tell truths, assimilation. If those are our children, loved, lauded, and held out with pride, who are those who are excluded from our self-declared societal project? If these are the pride and joy, I have asked myself, what are the illegitimate, the shunned, those not invited, swept into the corner at celebrations? Who are orphans? Who are those rejected, dejected, hidden, and excluded? Who are the orphans of Bill 101? Over 50% of English-speaking Quebecers have left Quebec since the 1970s. The total number is actually not even known statistically, as this is only tabulated if they show up in the census in another Canadian province, with all our family and friends who might be in the US, UK, or further afield not included in this statistic. Two terms, of course, are key for understanding the plight of the English-speaking community in Quebec. Missing middle and the missing out middle. The English-speaking community is defined by declining population, an aging population, what is described as the missing middle, and with a low proportion of people aged 15 to 44, and a missing out middle, having on average lower levels of income and employment than their French-speaking counterparts. I'm going to talk a bit about the language rights ecosystem and its resuscitation. In the early 2000s, there was Alliance Quebec and the Equality Party, Keith, former leader of the Equality Party. They ceased to operate under a variety of internal, financial, and external pressures and conflicts. The language rights ecosystem and an activist interest group leading the charge on policy initiatives, commentary, and leading legal initiatives with a complementary provincial political party. Proposing legislation contesting elections and influencing legislation with amendments and questioning the government of the day and other parties and their proposals cease to exist. The Task Force on Linguistic Policy, which you may have heard of, originally an ad hoc committee of language equality, égalité linguistique, an advocacy group I founded about 4 years ago to the day, almost 2021, to lobby against the white paper on language that was proposed by the Government of Canada, has now grown into an incorporated federal not-for-profit with thousands of members, board of directors, and has raised almost $200,000 towards advocacy and legal cases. The Canadian Party of Quebec, founded by members of the task force who established the Exploratory Committee on Political Options in early 2022 to see if a new political option, federalist, language rights oriented, and human rights minded, was viable. Our answer was a definitive yes. Though we were not successful in winning seats, we raised and spent over $200,000, became the 7th of 27 largest parties, and framed the debate for non-francophone voters on bills 96, 21, and 40, where they might have been ignored otherwise. All federal and provincial legislators sitting in the Parliament of Canada and Quebec's legislatures voted for Bill C-13 and Bill 96. All of them who sat at the time did at one point or another. I just realized that the other day. Voting against third reading are only one aspect of a complex 5 or 6 part legislative process, depending on whether you're at the provincial or federal levels. No major political party proposes to abolish or even holistic amendments to either of those bills if elected. Where are the formal protests by legislators or mass resignations, like Clifford Lincoln's pronunciation that tautological rights are rights are rights? Instead, we've heard from a now elected candidate, Bill 96 has no place in a free society, but ran with a party that would keep nearly the entirety of Bill 96. Or my opponent in the last election described Bill 96 as a fighter for life. Since the 2022 election, how many amendments have been tabled by members of Quebec's legislature to modify or repeal Bill 96 in full or in part? 0. Bill 96, the Saskatchewan First Act, and Quebec's Oath Act all fail, additionally, to mention the constitutional amending formula, which would they purport to amend the Canadian Constitution. We can additionally thank the Government of Canada, Minister of Justice Aref Virani, and Liberal MPs for actually inventing the legal rationale for the balkanization of Canada, where no province actually explicitly mentioned Section 45, which Joe alluded to in his speech, provincial amendments in their own legislation. Last week, the Government of Canada sought to legally recuse himself from a Bill 96 court challenge, spearheaded by the task force. Such is the current day, largely unspoken constitutional crisis. Our Constitution is no longer inviolable. Provinces are carving out their own jurisdictions unilaterally. Quebec has a distinct legal status no other province has. And the Quebec and Canadian governments have worked in concert on this initiative. But what can we actually do to cultivate a viable English-speaking community in Quebec? Firstly, representative elected officials and institutions. The English-speaking community requires leadership at all levels of government, not just symbolic representation. Require individuals who can exercise agency, creativity, and intelligence in confronting the systemic indignities that confront our community. This requires institutional vehicles to cultivate leaders and institutions for them to occupy. Secondly, representative government employees and professions. English speakers comprise 0.7% of the civil service, and cultural communities, i.e. visible minorities, comprise 2.2% of the civil service. And this is where 1/3 of English speakers are also racialized in the province of Quebec. These invisible leaders are sorely lacking in Quebec, from director generals of municipalities, large and small, to police officers, to CLSC directors. English speakers must be educated, groomed, and provided with professional, personal, educational support networks to cultivate these tertiary leaders that develop and apply policy on a daily basis. As well, English speakers are underrepresented professions, with new onerous burdens for professionals under Bill 96. That doesn't actually require you just to pass one French language exam, but recurrently every several years. And that constrains the supply of respiratory therapists to land surveyors. Thirdly, economic opportunities. English-speaking Quebecers are poorer than French speakers in Quebec, and indeed in the rest of Canada. The amount is now $52,000 less a year in income than a francophone with the same age and education. This is substantial socioeconomic disparity needs to be rectified. English speakers are, contradictorily, at once extremely well educated and also high rates of low education. Additionally, English speakers are also much more likely to have high educational attainment, with 30 having a university degree or better versus only 19.2% of francophones. Of those aged 24 to 44, 43% of English speakers versus 30% of French speakers have higher education. In regards to the percentage of Anglophones in the labor force, 65% are working versus 64% of francophones. However, the unemployment is greater despite this, with about 9% of English speakers unemployed versus 6.9% of francophones, but a 25% increase. Fourthly, freedom from onerous legislative restrictions. We need to ensure all Quebecers are free from legislative restrictions based on ethnicity, race, sex, gender orientation, language, and other identifiers for their full engagement in civil society. We can promote French and a unifying Quebec identity with constructive measures that provide positive rights, and not punitive measures that hinder individuals, cripple the economy, and diminish the dignity of all Quebecers. What can we do individually? In a macro sense, we must encourage incentive structures for individuals, corporations, educational institutions, government employees and institutions, and political parties and actors to provide vehicles for full engagement in civil society. And when they do not, provide a feedback loop and disincentives to these actions. In short, buy from companies that respect you, complain if public services are not adequate, vote for legislators who will actually defend your interests, and engage in civil society. You have a voice, a vote, and funds. Use them. In conclusion, when thinking of the modern state of the Canadian nation, I sometimes reflect on the famous stanza from T.S. Eliot's poem, The Hollow Men. This is the way the world ends. This is the way the world ends. This is the way the world ends. Not with a bang, but a whimper. If Canada ceases to exist at all, or in its current form, as appears to be the elite consensus, let it go out with a bang. Canada deserves more than a whimper. I hope you'll join me and others in making a lot of noise. Lâche pas, mes amis. There's a Quebec for us too. We just need to grasp it. Thank you.
Shout too. I can give it all.
Yes, please. Yes, please.
So I'm also the health critic and co-leader, as I said, at CAPQ. I just had a couple of questions to kind of get the room warmed up a little bit over here. So who's bilingual or speaks more than 2 languages? Raise a hand. Very nice. And who here has a family doctor?
A what?
Family doctor. Okay, not bad, not bad. No? Okay, I see some naysayers. And that's a really terrible thing, isn't it? Are you all fed up living in a province obsessed with the decline of French?
Yeah.
Are you tired of defending yourself or functioning in any other language?
Yes.
Are you sick of living in a province where healthcare services are over-centralized, impersonal, and inaccessible?
Yeah.
Yes.
Wasn't expecting a lot of pushback on that. Do you dream of the days when the local hospital had an emergency room, beds, and a staff to treat you? Do you remember when your family doctor was a phone call away and could see you that day? Who remembers that? I actually remember that.
No.
Are you frustrated by living in a province with a lack of government accountability when it comes to universal access to health care?
Yes.
The Health Care Act, the Canadian dream, was meant to make access to health care universal. Basically, prevent provinces of managing the funds that are given to us by the federal government. And there's supposed to be regulations and accountability for those said funds.
I have a question.
Yeah.
On the funds that you just mentioned, okay, when the funds go to the provinces for the health care, is there anywhere we can go see that it was actually been given to the health care?
Yeah, so the question is there any how the money, the transfer money is being used. And there is some accountability. So as we'll see in the criteria and the and conditions for these transfers and for the universal health care, there is supposed to be sort of an auditing, sort of kind of audit that happens at the end of the year where the province does indicate what they're doing. Historically, there hasn't been a lot of sanctions, although it's possible for those sanctions to occur. So basically, the 5 criteria, as we see here, need to be publicly administered, comprehensive, so from start to finish, universally available, portable across provinces in the country, and accessible to all. And those conditions, you need to prove that those conditions are being met. So what does universal access to medical care actually mean? And the current situation tends to be focused primarily around financial access. So the idea is we don't want people to not be able to get medical care because they can't afford it, which is a great dream. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem to play out only in that way, and we're actually having reduced accessibility in other ways. So the other aspects of access are largely ignored, as anyone who doesn't have a family doctor can attest. So if you try to get an appointment anywhere these days, like good luck, basically. So why did we care about making universal access a thing? Because there was a fear of a 2-tier system at the root of the Health Care Act. So if you can afford to get treatment, you'll get treated, and those who can't afford won't. And this is unfair. So in theory, private care would siphon funds and professionals away from the public system and thereby weaken it. And in practice, the restricted access to timely care by removing financial incentives to institutions and professionals for quick and preventive measures. So it's not actually working is what we're seeing, despite best intentions. And the fact of the matter is that managing healthcare is a prevention nightmare, is extremely expensive. Healthcare is the biggest ticket item in prevention budget, and the needs for fiscal and financial responsibility is at odds with provincial autonomy. Quebec cannot afford to provide universal access without Canada's help. We just can't. We can barely balance the provincial budget, right? So I think it's 11 billion deficit. So Quebec is looking for loopholes to be able to create more access without having the transfer funds sort of sanctioned. So, for example, I was taken to the emergency room after having suffered a concussion by an ambulance. 6 months later, I was billed for said ambulance. I don't know if we could say that that actually is creating universal access. So if I can't afford to pay for my ambulance, where do I go? Yes, I could contest it. Yes, I could go through all of that. But it seems to go against universal access. And there are many other examples like that of loopholes. So this is where the jurisdictional intersection is occurring. So universal access to health care is a provincial or a federal matter. Does the federal or provincial charter of rights prevail in the case of health care? So we're just talking about now there might even be a provincial charter. What's going to happen in that constitution? By way of example, are federal language rights recognized in provincial jurisdictions? And this is where Bill 96 comes into play. So I'm thinking that we need to redefine access. So what about access to preventative medicine? What about access to alternative medicine? So yes, if you're having a heart attack, you will probably get seen. But if it isn't emergent like that, what happens? What if you don't want to take the traditional medical interventions and you want to do something alternative? What happens? What about geographical access to local clinics? What about access to education and training for aspiring healthcare professionals? So for example, if I want to receive my education in English to become a cardiologist, I might not be able to do that. What about access to accreditation for healthcare professionals? If I'm coming from outside of Quebec and I can't perform in French, I can't practice. What about access to individualized healthcare? So if I am an individual with my own needs and I have an agreement with a doctor, how can I access that adequately with the current system? Cannot. So it turns out Quebec is distinct. Overzealous centralization of provincial responsibilities, such as healthcare, mean that provincial autonomy effectively trumps federal regulation. So unconstitutional provincial laws are protected by the notwithstanding clause, and they combine to erode access to healthcare. So let's take a look at Bill 15 and Bill 96. So Bill 15 is the Santé Quebec bill, and Bill 96 is the language laws. So if the MUHC is now primarily a provincial institution under Santé Quebec, run by Santé Quebec, is the hospital considered a uniquely francophone workplace and not subject to federal bilingual access laws? It's a question. What about, will proof of historic Anglophone status be required to receive health services in English? Now, there was a whole hullabaloo about this over the summer, and they claim that this is not going to be an issue, and yet it isn't in law anywhere. So they're wanting us to believe that we can rely on people's good judgment and good faith interactions. I don't know if we can do that. And if you look at Bill 15 and Bill 21, if a local elder care residence is now also a provincial institution under Santé Quebec, will a professional health care provider be allowed to wear a symbol of their faith at work? So what happens when you put Bill 15 and Bill 96 together? What do you get? Confusion. It's a toxic mix, and as we saw, it was revealed in the summer. The OQLF visited the Jewish General Hospital and made complaints about Yiddish flags. On July 18th, the Quebec government issued a 31-page healthcare language directive, 31 pages to tell doctors how to do their job. And it didn't clarify anything. The OQLF visited Santa Cabrini Hospital, and they were investigating following a complaint. And you guys should be really concerned about this. Anybody can complain, and all complaints are taken seriously and investigated. Bilingual status can also now be revoked from a healthcare institution by Santé Quebec. So healthcare is effectively a crown corporation. On December 1st, 2024, Santé Quebec took over. 1,000 plus positions have been cut to date. More cuts are coming. Reduction in hours worked by 3.65 and 6.5%. The reduction in home care services. This, like if your elderly parent or whatever needs a shower, you're not going to get more than one a week. Reduction in the use of private health agencies. This is a bit of a sore spot, but it does help to have access to private care, better than having no access to care at all. They're cutting overtime hours, but they're not replacing those hours, so it just means fewer people on the job. They eliminate vacant positions. There are no hires, there are freezing everywhere. And if there's an absence, like someone doesn't show up for work, they're not replacing that person. You should all be very concerned about this. So despite a provincial budget deficit of $11 billion, and despite the highest amount of federal transfer funds, $13 billion, where's the money going? Why all these cuts? So what would you do with $13 billion? A yacht? 2, 3? What is the Quebec government doing? Language laws. So the key to good healthcare really is access. Okay, and this is our platform is to really propose improvements in access. So we really want to provide the best level of healthcare and social services to all Quebecers by reducing the gap between supply and demand, okay, for services and service providers. And we'd like to eliminate government monopoly over health services. So what is our policy? In a nutshell, big 5. Reject the Dubé reforms and Santé Quebec. Every time they centralize, it just gets worse. Yes?
Point number 1 is really important. Do you think we've gone too far with Santé Quebec, or can a new provincial government actually come in and abolish it?
Yeah, right, it's very sticky. I mean, we should all be really terrified that they're treating all of the people who are working in the health sector as wards of the state, and people can just be allocated wherever they like, and they say, no, we won't be doing that, but the fact of the matter is there's absolutely nothing stopping them. So if you get fired, that's it. If you're cut, you're cut. So it's scary. I don't know how we're going to walk it back, but we would like to. And I think the idea is to not centralize. We can govern, but we don't need to be, we want to bring it more to a local level. That's what works. So we want to increase the supply of care, right? We want to attract, train, and retain high-quality service providers. There's lots of ways of doing that, just ask any business person. And we want to decrease demand with preventative care. We want to be proactive instead of reactive. I don't want to wait for a full 150% capacity emergency room. You know, that's ridiculous. That should never be happening. So the idea is to decentralize and to personalize and individualize services. Have your family doctor, have local clinics, multidisciplinary teams, and ideally we have some federal support for that. So what do I mean by attracting high-quality service providers? We could recognize training received outside of Quebec. We could remove the French language requirement in favor of proficiency in either official language. We could pay bonus for working in rural areas. We could have additional funding for providers who assemble and lead local multidisciplinary clinics or teams. What else could we do? We can train high-quality service providers. Bilingual training as part of institutional accreditation and funding. So if you only get funding and accreditation for training people in both official languages, then people are going to smart up and start doing it. Requirements to receive continuing education training in both official languages. So it's not like you go to school and you get to continue to be proficient in both languages. A portion of credits to be given into service providers in other official languages. How do you retain high-quality service providers? You pay a bonus for supervision and training of students or junior practitioners by senior practitioners. So I do this in my own practice. I'm a senior practitioner and I dispatch the students to junior clinicians, and that allows me to see well over 2,000 patients when I would normally not be able to do that alone, but I can have a team working for me. Why? Because I'm not centralized. You pay bonuses for governing board membership in local clinics and hospitals. So if I'm participating on a board of a local hospital, I can come in with information from the ground. You can pay bonuses for providing training opportunities in both official languages to students and junior practitioners. How do we decrease demand? Proactive instead of reactive treatments. Favor individualized long-term care plans in conjunction with crisis intervention. Give bonuses for multidisciplinary teams working together to develop those long-term care plans. Reward private insurers for coverage of a wider range of service providers, not just specialists. Reward private insurers for coverage of well visits in all age groups. Fund research in alternative medicine. Bonus for clinics making use of low-tech solutions rather than reliance upon specialists and mega hospitals. If the doctor has to see each patient, like they started out with nurse practitioners, and this has been a very successful intervention because they can really get through a larger number of people. The problem is that the doctor doesn't get paid if the nurse sees them. That's a problem. We shouldn't be doing that. We shouldn't be bottlenecking the system this way. Individualized services, decentralized individualized services. Favor the use of existing local services, whether private or public. Facilitate development of more local clinics and local self-governance. Facilitate creation of local multidisciplinary teams in response to specific local demands. The demands of Montreal are not the same as the demands of Quebec, as the demands of Chiburum. Ensure all services are available bilingually, regardless of location. Make use of interpreter services if necessary. It's called Google Translate, folks. Not that difficult. We would ideally have federal support for this. Transfers from Ottawa could be increased. Transfers from Ottawa could be contingent upon following charter rights with respect to language rights and minority rights. Funding for NGOs could be equitable in both French and English populations. So, what's your future with the CAPQ? Canadian charter rights being upheld, staying Canadian. We're going to hear a bit more about that after. Complete universal access to health care, not just economic access. Bilingual, language rights are protected. Multicultural, ethnic and religious rights are protected. A prosperous economy, free local enterprise encouraged. High educational attainment, excellence in curriculum and pedagogy, regardless of language. Join us. fight the good fight. We're for bilingualism, access to education, healthcare, religious rights, building a strong economy, cross-cultural recognition and reconciliation. I have an action plan for each of you. I like to get people doing stuff. So we want to increase membership. So probably many of you are already members, and if you're not, we can help you sign up for that today. We would also like to increase the candidate pool in the 2026 election, as Colin was telling us earlier. Despite not having run that many candidates, we did quite well. And if we could run more candidates in the next election, we could do even better. Multimedia exposure, we have a little bit of media here tonight, which is fantastic. Community exposure, each of you can go back and talk to people you know around you, your neighbors, your friends, you know, the cashier at the grocery, I don't care. We need to fundraise, of course, and there are ways to do that. We can help you, come see one of us. And more events like today, we talked about an event taking place later on this year. And of course, like I said, we're in math. Thank you.
I think our next speaker, Keith.
Good evening, folks. Can you hear me?
Sorry?
You know, I'm old enough to have been through referendum 2. And the prelude to referendum 3 strikes me as déjà vu all over again. And I'll tell you why. It looks as though we're headed for a Parti Québécois government. It's not my great desire, you can be sure. But the polls suggest that that's where it's going. And the leader of the Parti Québécois has promised during the first term of his mandate to have referendum 3. In 1994, 1 year before referendum 2, that was exactly the same situation. The polls said the Parti Québécois was going to win, and we in the Equality Party, because we did exist, would ask our liberal opponents, what will you do if the Parti Québécois wins and we're faced with referendum 2? And the answer the Quebec Liberal Party gave was, vote for us and there won't be a referendum. We said, but you might lose, and if you lose, what will you do? And the answer was, vote for us and there won't be a referendum. So they never explained, ever, what their position would be if there was a yes vote. Déjà vu all over again. Because the Quebec Liberal Party still won't tell you what they would do if there was a yes vote, 30 years later. Now this is what happened. In 1994, and you'll forgive me, I'm going to be 80 soon, so I'm allowed to do a little history. In 1994, we went to the electorate with 3 positions. Our position was staying Canadian. And I have the brochures to prove it. We made 3 arguments, and this was early on. 3 arguments. First, 50% plus 1 in any Quebec referendum was not enough to break up a country. That was argument number 1. Argument number 2, if ever there was a sufficient vote, the borders of Quebec would be on the table to be negotiated. And argument number 3 was, Canadians had the final word. If there was a yes vote, there would have to be a constitutional amendment to ratify whatever was decided. All those 3 arguments we made. We did not get elected. Quebec Liberal Party got elected. And unfortunately, the pattern has continued. Because we obviously, coming from me, you know, I think we need proper representation for our pro-Canadian point of view. This, we didn't win the election, we got no seats, but the referendum happened. So we said we're going to make the same arguments. We're going to say 50% plus 1 isn't enough. The borders are on the table to be negotiated, and it requires a constitutional amendment if you guys on the yes side win. We brought that to the no side committee, because there were two committees, a yes committee and a no committee. It's very important to know that this no committee wasn't just Daniel Johnson, Liberal leader. It consisted also of Jean Chrétien, the federal leader and prime minister of the country, and Jean Charest, who happened to be leader of the Conservatives at the time. We took the argument to them, this is what we want to argue during the referendum campaign. They said, no, you can't. That is not a good argument, and it will turn people off. So you're not allowed to argue that. We said to them, that's not for you to decide what arguments can be made and what arguments can't be made. We're going to take you to court, which we did. Now, we couldn't argue anything during the time we were in court, because there is a referendum court. We took the no committee, our federal leaders, to court, and we won. They were charged with violating our freedom of expression. This is not a story which is well known. It should be, because it's a real black spot on our history. Think about it. This is 1995. We had already sent a letter to Jean Chrétien saying, you know, you should refer this whole question to the Supreme Court of Canada. This is a legal matter. There's no legal framework for these referendums. And he poo-pooed that. He said, no, no, this is not a legal matter. This is a political matter. We're not going to do that. Then he almost lost. Those of you who were there know the look on his face. He almost lost. About a month after, maybe it was later, was December of 1995, the Equality Party and friends in the Special Committee for Canadian Unity organized a meeting at the McGill Moot Court. We thought, well, we'll get 200 or 300 people. We're small. Not everybody shows up for small parties. 2,000 people showed up for that meeting. And it was, interestingly enough, William Johnson, praise be, he was, of course, a columnist for the Gazette, and a very good one, knew that Jean Chrétien, who happened to be in India at the time on a trade mission, saw the CPAC television version of this moot court meeting at McGill and changed his position on a dime. He was going to take the whole question to the Supreme Court of Canada, which he did. He appointed Stéphane Dion as his Intergovernmental Affairs Minister. He was the one who supervised taking the whole question to the Supreme Court of Canada. And 3 years later, 1998, we had the famous reference court decision from the Supreme Court. Sidebar conclusion. Small parties, dedicated, can achieve a lot, even if they are not elected. They can force issues, put forward ideas which at one point are neglected and disparaged by even our federal people, and at other points, as happened, remember those 3 points were totally vindicated by the Supreme Court of Canada in their decision. No, 50% was not enough. Borders would be on the table, and it required an amendment to the Canadian Constitution to ratify any agreement. That is what happened, and what emerged a year later was the Clarity Act. The Clarity Act, and I'll give you just one very important element of that law. It is the law of the land. There are people who disparage the notion of dividing Quebec territory to this day and say it is impossible. And yet I'm going to read you this key element of the Clarity Act, which was passed in the year 2000, 25 years ago. No minister of the Crown shall propose a constitutional amendment to effect the secession of a province from Canada unless the Government of Canada has addressed in its negotiations any changes to the borders of the province, I stress that, the rights, interests, and territorial claims of the Aboriginal peoples of Canada, territorial claims, I stress that, and the protection of minority rights. The federal government is required to negotiate border changes. I should mention, because it's vital, before the second referendum took place, natives in Quebec held their own referendum. They asked their own people, do you want to go with this new country or do you want to stay in Canada? I'm paraphrasing. And they voted overwhelmingly to stay in Canada. And that overwhelming interest in remaining in Canada gets reflected in the Clarity Act. The interests and territorial claims of the Aboriginal peoples of Canada. So let no one tell you that it is impossible for us to renegotiate the boundaries of Quebec given a yes vote. It's already the law of the land, which some people tend to forget. So let me just add, Stéphane Dion was well acquainted with the problem. And he sent a letter to his intergovernmental affairs counterpart, Jacques Bressard, in 1997. And in that letter, I have one small quote from it, which I think is a very important quote. He said to Jacques Bressard, "Our governments too, like Switzerland, could be obliged to find arrangements that would not impose secession on populations that do not want it. If you had won the last referendum, we would have been forced to deal with this issue when no one was prepared." Note that. Dion recognized no one was prepared for the territorial question in 1995, and he proceeded to argue that we should be. Now, shortly before Referendum 3, we have to be prepared for the territorial arguments in a way that is better than even what the Clarity Act has suggested. Why am I making that point? The Clarity Act says that changes to the borders of the province must be negotiated, but never specifies how and on what basis, which is vital. It goes on to say the territorial claims of the Aboriginals will be respected. But my question, and it should be everyone's question here, what about the territorial rights of Canadians? Should they not be respected? And Stéphane Dion knew full well what the implications of Switzerland were. A lot of Canadians don't know that story, but should know. The Swiss are divided into, they're not called provinces, they're called cantons. One of them, back in the 1970s, so it's not that long ago, was a mixture of German majority, German-speaking majority, and French-speaking minority. The canton was called Berne. And the French-speaking minority didn't want to be pushed around by the German-speaking majority. They got fed up. Ring a bell? They got fed up, so they said, We don't want to be part of this German-speaking majority canton anymore. We want to have our own canton. And they petitioned the Swiss federal government to do that. And the Swiss federal government permitted a series of referendums. And lo and behold, the French-speaking minority got their wish, their own separate canton divided from there, based on the results of a referendum. Scrupulously counted. So it was the federal government of Switzerland that oversaw that referendum process and granted a new canton called Jura, which exists to this day. And it was, for the most part, democratic and peacefully done. So it is possible. It is possible a democratic European country has gone through the process. And we should remember, we have our own closer to home example. Because the Northwest Territories held its own referendum in the 1990s and divided Nunavut from the rest of the Northwest Territories because they wanted respect for their own Inuit language. That was one of the arguments. That happened peacefully and democratically. Where am I going? It is vital for Canadian-minded people, such as I'm sure the majority in this room, to insist that the federal government protect our rights so that they are not subject to nationalist referenda on a decade-by-decade basis. They can do that, and towns and cities cannot. The only government that can represent our rights is our federal government. They can hold their own referendum, saying if there is a yes, just as the natives did, if there is a yes vote, do you want to go with a new state or do you want to remain Canadian? And they can do that at any time. They have as much right to conduct a referendum as the provincial government does. And they could find out, based on the results, what the potential borders of a new Quebec, call it West Quebec, might be. Doesn't mean that that border comes into effect. It just means they have verifiable results about where Canadians who live in Quebec want to be. Do they want to be with a new state or do they want to remain Canadian? That seems to me a vital question, one long overdue, and one, and I close on this, just so you understand that the more things change, the more they remain the same. We proposed exactly this in a detailed letter to all the federal leaders, asking them to respond. This is Canada. Guess how many responses we received? 0. 0. But I remind you, when we asked Jean Chrétien, the federal leadership, can we please argue what ultimately turned out to be the Supreme Court's position? Can we argue this during the referendum? They said, no, you're not allowed, and violated our own freedom of expression in doing so. After the Clarity Act was passed, Jean Chrétien was asked, what is the most important thing you did in your political life? He said, the passage of the Clarity Act. We can make a difference, even if we're not elected. But if we speak up, and as Colin Standish has said, make noise, we can accomplish a great deal.
Like I said, the 90s, if I'm not mistaken, there was a map, which was Quebec provincial territory.
You're going to have to yell at me. Go ahead. You have a question as well, if I understand. Okay. Yell away.
Like I said, the 1990s, the referendum was coming due. You had the territories already divided. Who was in Quebec, and what was in Canada. And it was a big change.
A map.
A map, yes. Like I said, do you remember that?
I do, absolutely.
That's
It
what
took
you're
a
telling me.
while, please understand. Initially, when we made these arguments, we were considered dinosaurs, outrageous, how dare you talk that way. That was really, it was considered totally outside the norm to be raising these issues. But then eventually, yes, even La Presse and French-Canadian news outlets began to say, you know, it's as legitimate as our own proposal to separate Canada. Their partition argument is just as legitimate. And they were polled. 2/3 of French Canadians agreed it's just as legitimate to do that. So, yes, I do remember the map. Very important. I don't have it.
Keith, question is, if the federal government, if the federal government fails to live up to their obligations to respect what you just mentioned, is it possible for us to sue them? And what I put into an example for that is the Omar Khadr, who sued the federal government because the government did not represent him, even after the Supreme Court said that they had to, and that was under Mr. Harper, who just didn't want to know about it, and he just ignored it. And Mr. Trudeau ended up having to settle out of court with him for millions of dollars.
Mike, that's a really good question. And what I want to do is, you guys have heard from us. It's enough from us. We're really here to hear from you. I want to move this into the town hall portion.
We can't hear, sir.
Get more of this question and answer going. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to briefly summarize the 3 speeches that we made. I'm going to end with exactly that, Mike, because that's exactly where we're at right now. What is the federal government doing? What are their obligations? Where's their discretion? And where are they? All right, so let's go back to what we heard in the fastest way I can possibly so we can all start to engage. What did Colin tell us? Colin told us that you protect the French language by creating francophone rights in a positive manner. By the way, that's true in every other democracy. When you hear about collective rights in France, they are established through individual rights. There is no such fascist overlay that creates a cultural right without coming through individual rights. That's a narrative we hear often in Quebec. We hear that there is this almost amorphous body that has rights, and that is something that supersedes democratic rights at an individual level. That's a nonsense. That doesn't exist in France. That doesn't exist in any democracy. Let's make clear about that. Positive rights are different than protecting French and promoting French by attacking Canada, attacking Canadianism, attacking any other person, any other language, and any other culture. This has nothing to do with defending the French language and Quebec culture. It doesn't even represent Quebec culture. That's a nationalist and separatist project that most francophones, as we know, would love to reject if they could, but don't have the power to do so. That's the way our voting works. That's what we heard from Colin in a nutshell. From Murtis, how do we summarize that? The autocrats and technocrats are running the asylum. I mean, it really comes down to that. To care about the patient, any focus on how the system works, its results, its success, gone. Right? We've got doctors fighting nurses, nurses fighting dietitians, every union fighting every other union, and the government doing nothing to create a system that helps and enables our healthcare workers and puts everyone back into the position they joined the healthcare industry for in the first place, helping other people. Instead, we have people clawing at each other's faces because they can't get resources, they can't do the basics of their job. Did anyone see that paramedic incident this week? Yeah. The beauty of that is how many people missed the point. You understand that it's not about whether there's a legal obligation. Let's be very clear. This is one of the only places in the world where you can find healthcare workers now proud not to do their best to try to help people. Okay, that's culture. The language you deliver that in is just a tool of culture. Culture is what you do with language. We need to be very concerned about our culture. I happen to work in healthcare, and I get to work with a lot of great professionals. I work on a technology company that's really trying to enable doctors to deliver care much quicker. We're talking about within 5 minutes of admission. So of course, I don't work in Canada. I work for a US company that's actually trying to do better in healthcare. I'm not qualified to work in the Canadian healthcare I graduated from Harvard, Oxford, and I have a diploma from the Paris Chamber of Commerce in Business French. I can't get an interview in Quebec. That's what we're running here. Let's be very clear about that. So we need to think about what is the culture and what does that mean? Who are we putting in positions of power? What are the systems we're designing and who are interacting with the public? Then let's go to Keith's speech. Referendum 3 is coming. The PLQ answer, to be fair, has evolved. In the past, it was vote for us and we will not have a referendum. Now it's vote for us and we will institute a constitution that will erase your Canadian heritage and Quebec's, all for you, without worrying about the other parties. We need to be very careful about what's being said by people who don't even understand the issues they're discussing it, let alone the history behind them, let alone the larger and complex picture. So to boil down Keith's speech, yes, we've sent a letter to every federal party. We've heard nothing back, but we demand that they institute a federal referendum, poll by poll in this province, so that when we have a provincial referendum, it's not if, it's when we have a provincial referendum, there is a very clear question. And we can all support that question. That is a referendum that we must come together to support as a people. There are 2 million Quebecers who are platformed and have 100% control of our government and the narrative of who Quebec is. But that doesn't represent 6 million other Quebecers who want nothing to do with that project, who are proud of Quebec, who are proud to be bilingual, trilingual, who love French, who are ironically the defenders of the French language in the rest of Canada when they leave the province, but are attacked at home for how they speak English. This is nuts. This doesn't represent our francophones. I happen to have a francophone wife. I have 4 francophone stepchildren I've seen go through the francophone public education system. Whole other town hall we should have about that. And I have a baby who is now a half Italian ethnic and half French ethnic Quebecer and Canadian, who does not need to be burdened with this reputation. These are not our Quebec francophones. These are nationalists and separatists whose project is over-platformed because of the structure of our democracy. I.e., we have MNAs that represent 3,000 people, and we have MNAs that represent 45,000 people. That's not democracy. And that's what we're dealing with. And that's why we need the federal government to step in. So if we can step down, now we really want to hear from you. What are your observations? We've got the mic, everyone come this way, let's all three here as we can.
What about the lawsuit?
Oh, sorry, so the lawsuit. So, give me 1 second. Mike did ask a question before I tried to summarize the start. We'll come right back to you, sir. So I really tried to avoid the cameras. Some of you may recognize me from the task force lawsuit last Monday on Global News. And let me just say, it's very disheartening as a Canadian to have the Attorney General of Canada show up in court, supply in his own evidence binder, the Constitution Act, with Bill 96 stapled to it, then pirouette about trying to say, well, they hadn't accepted something or a unilateral change to the Constitution, that they know there's an amendment formula, but they don't want to be named in this case, and they shouldn't have to be there. Mike, the reality is there are procedures that should have been followed. There is a reference case that should have been had. There's disallowance that should have happened. And then, of course, now we are pursuing them as effectively a named defendant, or the equivalent in this case. And they're trying to say they shouldn't be there because it's a provincial law, ignoring completely that they've basically stapled it to the Constitution. So the answer is you can sue them. We have the task force. We've been rejected by Heritage Canada for funding. You know that court challenges program that everyone says is there to protect your rights? Well, only Joe Ortona and the English Montreal School Board has received funding. Why do you think that is? Because even La Presse can't not publish that, right? But when you're a private citizen defending your rights, part of the silent 75% of Quebec that has no representation, you don't have access to the court challenges program, because our nationalist provincial government is very much in concert with our nationalist federal government, if you haven't noticed. So you're right, Mike, we can sue them. If we're relying on the courts, it's game over. This is time for a movement, it's time for politics, it's time to change the laws, right? These are bad laws. We are now being told by people that they're doing legal things under the auspices of a law that can only be passed with the notwithstanding clause, which preemptive use inherently means you know you're violating basic law. This is the insanity that's been normalized, this logical loop of nonsense. These are the people that are elected in office today. So we can sue them for the next 20 years. But they've shown no scruples in terms of passing laws that are legal. And let's be very clear, the framework they've established is to unilaterally declare independence, right? Sneaking this amendments to the Constitution in without a Charlottetown or a Beach Lake or an amendment formula or a Supreme Court reference case is the test balloon for another referendum that's effectively legally a popularity contest. But for them to turn around and say, we're declaring it and we're writing it in. As Keith outlined, this has to be done. There are procedures. If the government chooses not to enforce its own constitution, which is the situation we're in, we're all in trouble. So I believe that was the first question up there.
Yeah, I've been in Canada 51 years now. So I've seen the first referendum and my discussion. What I want to know is that the root of this, one of the most important things is, well, other than the federal government, it's a federal so-called excuse for charter of rights, which is the notwithstanding clause. Is there anything we can do legally or politically to literally get rid of this clause? Because apparently very few countries in the world actually have some kind of exception clause in their constitution, first of all. And second is basically, as one person, a lawyer put it, human rights are human rights are human rights are human rights. There's no if, and, but.
So I'm very much aligned with you. The notwithstanding clause is an aberration that shouldn't exist. Right? And the only reason it's there is that Canadian politics is rife with a history of appeasement and compromise on basic principles.
What I don't understand is the Constitution, from what I've read about it in 82, Beach Lake, I guess. This was a political decision. Doesn't the Supreme Court have a final say on these things?
It's a really important structural question about the nature of our government.
Yeah,
so we're not in the United States.
This baffles me.
So, you know, we often think about independent branches of government establishing checks and balances. The Supreme Court of Canada is subordinate to the legislature. Everything in Canada, the Supreme Court of Canada is subordinate to the legislature in Canada. Okay, there is no independent, which is why it's so important to have legislators. Absolutely, you have independence and checks and balances between the branches of government. That's not the case here, right? So everything is subordinate to Parliament, which is why it's so dangerous to have a federal government that politicizes basic legal response structure and defense of its own constitution and supreme law. So there's not a good answer to that question that we're really happy with. I think it's necessary. I think that is the beginning of a new movement that needs to happen in this country, reaffirming what it is to be Canadian. But it's not a legal reality right now.
Yeah,
Colin just wants to
Yeah, or just on the legalese, I just want to jump in for a second.
Yeah,
This is good. Can I just answer this? Sorry, Sam. Yeah, sorry. I just wanted to jump in sort of some lawyerly, non-legal advice, but you can remove the notwithstanding clause from the Constitution, so it is there, Section 33. Things to keep in mind: it nullifies only 1/3 of the Constitution, but very important aspects, Section 2 and 7 through 15, for 5 years, right? So you have to pass it every 5 years, or otherwise the Constitution trumps it. So it's an interesting debate whether the legislature, the Constitution, has more power or not between academics, and it's sort of the Charter will start to apply if you just let it expire. Second, you can take it out of the Constitution is something, as Joe said, you could actually have a movement. To my understanding, would fall under the general procedure, so 7 provinces with 50% of the population, etc. You could take it out of the Constitution, right? And a big part of the task force legal challenge and some of the other challenges, we'll see with Bill 21, I think it's going to percolate as a big question, is the use of the notwithstanding clause preemptively. Unfortunately, the way it's written, right, you can invoke it willy-nilly on any piece of legislation. They did that, people, myself in the early 80s, every law from 82 to 85, the notwithstanding clause applied, every Quebec law, and then they just let it roll off the books. So it'll be interesting, and basically in the Ford decision in the 88, I believe it was, there was Devine, Ford, and another one, the trio decisions that you guys would have lived through in a way that I was 2 years old at the time. But they basically said as long as there's form of it, like you invoke Section 33, that's all that needs to be required. The substance of it doesn't matter. You can invoke, suppress any right or freedom. So just wanted to give a little bit of the constitutional and jurisprudential status of Section 33.
You're saying it's kind of vaguely worded as a law? It can be interpreted any way? Or?
No, it's very precise actually. So it's 5 years you can opt out of these rules, these rights and freedoms, right? So it's very precise, but it can be used on any piece of legislation, right? So it was always considered it was politicians and the political, nuclear button that would prevent people from doing it. We're seeing that's eroded over time. They're using it in Alberta, they're using it in Ontario, they're using it in Quebec, all the time. So yeah, just a little one to add.
Yeah, I'd like to raise something that
keep it is, I was in St. Lambert when the referendum was. I was the president of the Freedom of Choice movement. Anyway, a guy came along and joined, very nice guy, an American, and he came to all our meetings and he kept asking me, what's going to happen if they win the referendum? I said, I don't really know. And he said, people in St. Lambert, what would you do? I said, well, they're mostly Anglophone. I said, they'd probably try and stay part of Canada. He said, how would it do if they were part of the United States? So I said, well, I don't know why that would happen. And I didn't realize that it was somebody else told me. This guy happened to be from the CIA. The Americans were prepared to seize the St. Lambert logs in the event of a problem. Now, given that we have an utter nutcase south of the border, if we have another referendum and votes splitting up, there is a very real possibility that the Americans would seize the seaway, because most of the boats in the seaway go inland to the Americans, you know, to the Midwest and so on. So, if indeed there is a referendum to split Canada up, I'll guarantee you that the guy down south of the border will be up here with his soldiers, and that was a possibility then, and it's even more of a possibility now. So when you start breaking up a country, it doesn't get broken up in the way that we all think it ought to be broken up. That never happens. It's never happened in history, never happened. But the other thing I'd like to mention, I was a teacher, a bit critical. I've been in every province except the 3 northern ones. I used to teach history. Every province, Newfoundland, PEI, right to British Columbia, you go to historical sites, there's always French up. There's no Francophones living within 100 miles of the place. Come to Quebec, where there's hundreds of thousands of Anglophones, there's no federal signs in English. It's completely ridiculous, and I think we should make more of it as a group. But the last thing, I think, and I'm quite serious when I say this, we should take advantage of things at the moment. There's this guy who said to the library group, you must speak French. You must have all heard about that. What we should say is, and I think it would get us publicity, is fire the man. What the hell right has he got to tell us we can't speak English? Say we want him fired. They're not going to do it, but it would certainly bring a lot of support and a lot of attention to us as a group. I was a teacher, I criticize all the time. We have to focus much more. Attract people to join us. No, I mean, I agree with what's said and all the rest of it. It's too much. We focus on something simple, like some idiot telling us you have to speak French. Okay? Something like that would get his attention much more than anything. That's how the things work in life. And the last thing I'd advise you, if you're doing things, follow the money. Now, I was a teacher in education. They spend more money in French private schools than they do in these public schools. OCOL, this is something we can raise up. OCOL spends 2/3 of its money in Francophones outside. What the hell are they doing here? You don't see any English signs. They fund the textbooks, they're completely useless textbooks, totally stupid, but they spend the money. We should focus on 1 or 2 things and get attention that way. I enjoy hearing I agree with all these things, but you have to focus and make something, that's important. We are doing something, saying something, just a little thing, like some idiot saying you can't speak English. So we say, fire him. Okay, and I think that would get attention. Thanks.
I really appreciate those comments. And
Sounds like you should get that going.
it sounds like we have a candidate for
Yeah.
right.
I'm really confused, sir. We're about the same age, and you went to school in the 50s and 60s? You went to school in the 50s and 60s?
Yes, I did.
And there were nuns teaching you and brothers teaching you?
I went to a Protestant school, so no nuns.
The province was full of nuns and brothers and priests, and with their Muslim suits on, with their crosses hanging from themselves, with beads hanging all over the place. What is the big deal today?
I'm not sure what the question is. The big deal
What's
about
the big
what?
deal? The people wearing religious stuff.
Bill 21, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you're asking for is why are we making such a big deal about the laicite when we've been a secular society for decades?
Yeah.
It's a valid question. And I think, the real concern is how much gets swept under that rug, right? I mean, that's the reality of it, is, we have not been a very religious place for decades, and we secularized our government a long time ago. So what is this new push? I would propose that, anyone's speculation is valid as anyone else's, but I think we all get the feeling that it's pretty much just a way to put prejudice through the legislature. I'd love to see how that's not the effect. That's all the effects we're seeing. I'd love to see any statistics that showed it was necessary, it's a policy that works in any other jurisdiction. But again, I think it's a valid question because the policy was, a fix looking for a problem, not the other way around. So this is just cheap identity politics, is what I would call it. But
it started with Hérouville. Google that. It started with that.
Yeah. And Google that mayor's testimony 10 years later on how great the immigration community and the immigrant community in Hérouville has been, and how critical it's been to rekindling its economy. The problem is Quebec has no more time for these breakthroughs on a one-by-one level across our sectors.
I believe that the reason why they want it to be officially, strictly secular is people who believe in something else aren't going to be brought in so much into political deity because they have something else that they're following. So they want to get rid of that distraction so that they go on to the political deity.
I think you're right. I think there's a difference between secularism and anti-religious policy. This is an anti-religious policy, and in replace, in substitution effectively for people's faith and community they build that way, they've tried to effectively build a religion of statism, and that's the culture, and that's the nation, right? We can all support the Quebec nation in terms of its cultural definition, right? But the game being played between the word nation in English and nation in French, you have a nation state, or especially a provincial government whose obligation is only to a certain ethnographic definition of the people, which if you've read the first 2 pages of Bill 96, it's worth a read.
Oh,
it's worth a read. What defines the nation?
No, definitely. I mean, we've known that for a long time.
But now it's on paper, and that's the important part. The important part of this stuff is on paper, and so francophones themselves can make a decision, right? And I'm very encouraged by that because I'm fortunate enough to be younger than some of us in this room. I went through the '95 referendum. You got pretty keen memories of that as an 11-year-old. It was a fun time. But the truth is, I don't know a lot of francophones who are represented by the thought and the thinking and the actions I'm seeing in our press every day. I think the truth is when you pull up to Journal de Montréal, you're listening to Radio Cube, or you're watching TVA, you're getting your news from LCN, you are getting a very limited view of francophones. And that is crucially important to our nationalist governments to keep us divided artificially. And that's why we are not a partitionist movement. And there is something very focused to do, sir. And that is to demand that we support a referendum with a clear question that's coming. And this is 2025. It's not 1965, it's not 1985. We understand that we can work with an independent, I don't know what they want to call themselves, they shouldn't use the word Quebec since it's neither a French word, it's not related to New France, and it has to do with the territory created amongst 3 founding peoples with many other ethnic heritages by the British in 1774. But, we need to, as you said, pick a focus. And my focus is this simple. What we're seeing today is not democracy. That 2/3, if not 3/4 of Quebecers are not represented by every single party that's elected in our National Assembly. And we need at least one voice that's going to hold them to task. And on the same side, we need to take our federal government out from having its head in the sand and getting it to do its basic job defending the supreme law of this land. And if it does that, we will all have what we want. We can support that referendum done properly and democratically. What we can't support is being dragged into a country we have nothing to do with and having our rights as Canadian denied. That's not on the table.
Just sort of coming back. If I may, I am Dale from the task force. Those of you that are members of the task force, listening. I just some questions and some comments regarding the court cases. I just wanted to clarify that 2 of them very important events have
provincial and federal governments to court for them to do the basic job of respecting their own laws, raised in hundreds and fifties from individuals, because there isn't a foundation, there isn't a federal court challenges program, or anyone stepping up. There are a few big donors who are anonymous, thank you out there. But it's been a painful ride to raise that money. And Dale, thank you.
First, I want to say a big thank you for you guys standing up and supporting us. I really appreciate what you do. It's sad that we don't have more. And I would love to have you guys, at least in Quebec, and someone there to represent, change the health sector. Would be great. But I think that we're being too nice. I'm happy to say that. When someone says something stupid that's not necessarily right, we don't defend ourselves. We just say, yeah, okay, well, no. Say the reality. It's not true. Like you said, we've been here for a long time, and nothing has happened. Now it's like thrown under the bus. I'm sorry, that's not the case. Example, the McGill. They want to put the doctors, say, 5 years here. But if the conditions are not right over here, those guys don't want to stay here. I'm sorry. Why did we not have those problems before? They went to McGill, did their studies, came here, doctors over here. Now, they do it, they leave. They don't want to stay over here. They don't like it. I'm sorry, it's true. Now, the other thing, I can say a lot more, but I will not say it. There's one more thing. If the federal is not supporting us, then we need to have a federal party there representing the CPAC in Quebec. I believe that's important.
I think there's something to that, but I think what we've heard from the federal government clearly, and actually all federal parties, is that Quebec has to solve its problem on its own. So the truth is, this is what we're doing, right? And you're right, there is a bigger federal problem that's been created by denying what's going on in Quebec. It's like, we normalize notwithstanding clause use. Doug Ford jumped on it. We've got other amendments that have been accepted from other provinces in the Constitution now. The federal government has dropped the ball in such a significant way, I mean, an unimaginable way, that we're at that point. It's now time to reset. So again, there are focused things to do. And the first one is demanding a federal referendum so that every Quebecer is polled and has their right perspective. Do you want to be in a new territory created in the third referendum, or do you want to remain Canadian? And once we have those numbers, and once we know what that map is, let's imagine it's going to be all of southwestern Quebec, Montreal, and 80% of the territory the natives have already made very clear isn't going anywhere. We can all support that referendum. Okay? We have to stop fighting each other. We have to admit there is a significant part of the Quebec population that is not, has not, and will never be Canadian. But that has nothing to do with English and French. That's my challenge to all of you. Help us fight. But we need to fight the right way. It's been done wrong a lot. It's been paid right into the hands of division. But this has nothing to do with our religion, our language, our color. This has to do with whether or not you believe in Canadian values. And what are Canadian values? Well, that's being Canadian. All of us together. It is the contribution that all our societies make. It is the respect we pay to one another. It is the fact that we have 2 official languages and many, many, many more cultures here before and after those became official languages. And that there's a certain Canadian level of respect and duty and obligation we approach all of those citizens with. That's not respected at all by a certain number of citizens in this province. And it hasn't been in generations. We are in denial. The Liberal parties, both federally and provincially, have tried to deny this for decades. They have not accepted provincially the 1982 Constitution, just to pander to it. It has to stop. There are clear and simple lines, and our first project is this. Those are principles. Every solution this party will ever support will respect these principles. Can anyone delineate the principles of any other party in our provincial parties? See? What do they stand for? We have a set of career politicians opportunistically chasing the ball all around the field, all day. And in that space, a very diligent, concerted, and well thought out effort to attack and undermine Canada has taken deep root. And we need to either pluck it out or cordon it off. Both are fine.
We're all very, very
Yes, unfortunately, our second banner wasn't able to make it because it's
It's outside. It's outside. It's outside the front.
It's outside in the front, there's only two.
They cost money.
We got a 50-50 chance.
Another politics apart, the languages and all of this, but this meeting, how was it advertised? Where was it advertised?
It goes out through our newsletter, through our Facebook channels, and we had a phone chain calling our members and associate people. And then there's about 7 or 8 different not affiliated groups with the party who represent different Anglophone communities and rights that also publicize that. So we figured...
I think I saw it in the Suburban, am I right?
Yeah. Yes. The Suburban, the 15...
And it was so small, and I went back to find it several days later. I couldn't even find it. It was so
I know, we
small.
begged them to do it.
Do you use social
I
media?
expected this place to be jam-packed with standing room only. We're barely 25% occupied.
The weather has.
So
The weather
I
had
think
something.
you have to do something
Yeah.
about getting the message out and packing your halls.
And you can help.
Exactly. You guys have to do something.
Yeah.
It costs money, and we have to put in advertisements. Nobody listens to us. Nobody comes out to see.
But if you want to reach the generation of like 18 to 30, it's
Yep.
not Facebook. They don't use it anymore. You
Yep.
guys have to be on other networks and getting the message out that way. So
Yep.
like creating posts, sharing, like
Sorry, but my knee buckled.
that's branded, and I can put it on my Instagram, like on TikTok, like you have to think about using other
Yeah, it's the entrance.
100%. And well, a number of points here. Firstly, so sir, you'll notice this being live streamed because actually, like, quite frankly, physical body presence these days is a small measure of who's actually watching and paying attention. That said, I too would love to see a lot more people. There's a reason why we're in the West Island. I went to high school a few blocks away. My parents still live 5 blocks away. I know that every person in here represents 10,000 people of interest in this topic, right? So, and 100% you're right, it's not all on Facebook. Our biggest challenge is it's fragmented everywhere. You know, and so what happens is right now, we've had a number of events with students at Concordia and McGill. We're trying to build up a bit of a youth presence. But I'll tell you something that's changed. I'm an old man now at 40. When I was young, we were all involved in politics, trade clubs. It's a little bit different these days. There's a lot of, you know, non-political, political kind of groups at Concordia and McGill, and there's very few people who want to get involved, except for at the extremes. So you see lots of TikToks of kids complaining about service. You see very few TikToks about the moderate 95% of life. So we are struggling to find people, and that's part of our call to action. We need help. We are no different than you. There's no one here getting paid. There's no salaries. We're all volunteers. We all have real jobs. We all have kids and families. Right? We need people to take an interest in the society they're living in again and realize that they have the power. Not the narrative that seems crushing. Not the myth of who Quebec is. But us. We're Quebec. Take it back. And if you have someone for Instagram for me, please.
I've been following the federal leadership campaign, and Mark Carney yesterday told me that through Facebook, and everything on Facebook is true, that the English language is in decline. It's in decline. And this is in spite of statistics of the OQLF that it's not. So what I suggest is he can be given a chance to recuperate my respect that I had for him until yesterday by changing his comment. And he might need some persuasion to do that. And there must be a way that we, as a group, could do that, and such as can show up at leadership rallies that he's having as a group, and make ourselves heard and known. This is not a difficult thing to organize.
So Mark Carney, like most other politicians, are worthy of significant respect. I don't think anyone really gets into politics not to try to help, right? As I've defined, our issue is, are we all talking the same language? So in Quebec, we have separatists, we have nationalists. I don't think we can blame them for defending what they want, right? What we need to look to is who pretends to be on the side of Canadian values. Now, if you're following the Liberal leadership race, you'll notice that Mark Carney has been endorsed by Melanie Joly. If you're following the issues we're all talking about here tonight, let's take a few steps back. Melanie Joly writes a white paper after failing to win the mayoral position in Montreal on official languages when she's appointed as cabinet minister. That white paper hits COVID times. François Legault needs a policy for popularity. And the combination of Anglad's platform, the PLQ, and all of her recommendations for strengthening the French language, and Melanie Joly's federal white paper become Bill 96. All right, the CAC didn't even invent it. All right, it was just a gift given to them by both the federal and provincial Liberals. Now that's the person who Mark Carney has chosen effectively as his provincial lieutenant, while taking Pablo Rodriguez, the man who's actively rejecting, as the head of Heritage Canada, or Canada Heritage, court challenges programs to all of the nationalism and nationalist laws, ethno-nationalist laws in Quebec. So that's Mark Carney, and that's the Liberal Party. So if you're suggesting that, at that level of endogenizing Quebec nationalism into what the Liberal Party of Canada stands for is going to change because we protest Mark Carney, I would suggest to you, you need to look a little bit deeper, not at Mark Carney, but at the people around Mark Carney and what part of the Liberal Party he represents. I don't think there's a path there to have your voice represented. I think he's made that very clear, because you're absolutely right. He is very happy to pander and say there's a decline in French. But there's actual data. Right? We have more French speakers in this province than we ever had. The proportion is higher than it's ever been. The people who are able to converse in French and work in French is also higher than it's ever been. There is a decline in Francophone birth rates, just like the birth rates of every developed population in the developed world. And until we have that conversation in a fair manner, we can't even talk about it on the other side, which is immigration. We talk about immigration from the francophonie, and then we complain about immigration. But it's one or the other. So this is what I'm trying to propose to you, is that if you keep being led down the path of these elitist parties, this is their agenda. They understand that to corner Quebec votes, they pander to nationalism, and nationalism makes Quebec a one-issue, go-away province. But that's only representing 2 million people and not the other 6. It's time we stand up.
Wow, there's a lot to unload here. First of all, I'd like to say thank you to Mr. Standish, who reached out to me last week. I'm Eric Stork, City Councilor in Point Claire. This is actually my district. Die-hard Liberal, I'm here, and I had a great conversation with both of you in the last couple of weeks.
Fair disclosure, I was a Liberal youth delegate in 2009 from Lac St. Louis. I think we all were Liberals at some point.
Well, listen, Mario Dumont, when I was president of the Baby Club in Concordia, I understand Liberal policies. I guess what I'm here for is that, by the way, Mr. Henderson, when you were speaking, my spin, I was the guy tearing down wheat signs in Saint Laurent, okay, in the 80s and 90s, in both campaigns, okay? Alan D'Souza, Shirley Meyer, Stefan Zion, Robert Barassa, I was a political pundit from day one. I moved to Point Claire, and I became a city councilor. And I actually had Brent Cowan, city councilor in District 8 here as well, because I want to hear what you have to say. But what I'm driving at is Mr. Henderson, again, but what's the future? You have to change policy. It's not about talking about the past, it's about moving towards the future. Greg Kelly is upset that I'm here today, okay? I told him I'm coming here today, okay? But I told him, listen, I support you, but just do something. So, as I told Mr. Standish yourself, and sorry, your last name is a bit hard to announce, but yeah, thank you. But my point is that how do we move forward? How do we change the politics? It's about getting elected. I agree with all of the leagues, and both of you talk about this, that, and everything else. But you have to. Your first job is to get elected. What do we do? Again, I'm a Liberal. I'm here as an outsider. trying to support what you're doing, but I need the policies, I know, to do that. Like, so I want to talk about, understand, yes, listen, Equality Party, Robert Lincoln, there, done that, lived it. But what do we do to move forward to get things addressed? Get elected. I understand every principle you're talking about, all of the bills, but get elected. And that's what the focus should be on. Find vibrant people in our communities to do this. I spoke to Benoit Langevin for 2 hours today. No, but he's a youth. How do we change things? We have to change. The CAP doesn't give a shit about us. The Liberals, when they're in power, they don't. So how do we, and I'm not trying to reinvigorate the Equality Party, but yes, all these English rights things, like the Democratic Party in the U.S., it's not about abortion, it's about food, it's about our taxes. And I mentioned this to Mr. Spanish in our conversations. Drive the policies on the West Island that require attention, our overtaxation, use that as a lead. And our linguistic issues are, I hate to say it's secondary, but put food on the table, address our non-representation of Montreal in terms of taxation without representation. And if anybody's here in the West Island, we all know our top policy, the money we get to Montreal, we don't get it back. That's the driving force that we need to address. And if the Liberal Party doesn't do it, I stand behind you to do that. But we all care about our linguistic rights and freedoms, and I'm all about Jean Marrier, one of my good friends. You all know him, okay? I support him. Isn't it the 10th province or whatever it was called? I'm there, but create policies that are forward-moving, not going to the past. With all due respect, Mr. Anderson, but that's our driving force. That's our history. So we need to do something to move forward, create a party on the West Island. As I said again, and this is going to burn me politically, but we need to do something. We have to act. And we have to act about our issues, which are linguistic, yes, but taxation, create what Mr. Henderson created in the past. With Clifford Lincoln, geez. Like, we have so many great people here, but we need to move forward on issues. And I'm sorry, I wasn't prepared to say anything tonight, but that's what we have to move forward. We have to drive those issues. We need a third voice on the West Island. Because I'm not sure that, I'll say it again, the first voice and the second voice are representing us. And I think, drive that vision. You have a linguistic background that all of us support in terms of policies and bills and stuff like that, but, grab a grasp, move forward, find people who are willing to move forward. I'm sorry if I'm speaking too much.
Eric, that was great. We really appreciate that.
I just want to pardon?
Bring Greg Kelly with you next time.
I love it. Don't get me wrong.
These are good people. Let's not go into that. Okay? These are good people. Everybody gets elected and tries.
Okay? I understand. There's limited. I want the city council to point there. This is my district. I hear about all these issues.
Let's unpack this, okay? So you're 100% right. Okay, now you're a politician, so we're not going to come up here when there's basic lack of awareness on what's going on to present policies when we don't have access to budget, costing, or anything, right? So what we can talk about is what are the major problems and what are obvious solutions that we're not going into. But you bring up a whole other dynamic here, which is one I don't want to see us devolve into, which is attacking each other and attacking politicians, right? The Kellys, are a legacy family in the West Island, and they have done well by many constituents. But like many other representatives from our community, a lot of us are left going, where have you been the last 5 years? How are you letting this happen? And the truth, Eric, is that you can't go against the party. So no matter what, no matter how good these people are, if they don't belong to a party with basic principles that you can sign up to at the beginning, you will always have an opportunistic collapse at the end. So I agree with you 100%. If you want to go into it, let's go into it. I don't think it just has to be the West Island, and I don't support a partitionist movement for just the West Island, right? What we support is democracy in Quebec. So we don't want to drive a referendum, but if there's going to be one, we want it to be done in a legal, internationally recognized way. And then we can start talking about solving problems, because that's the problem with the current framework, is you can't even talk about a problem without it all devolving into
Get elected. Get elected, you can drive an agenda.
So we're gonna come to
That's
you
what's
for
important.
canvassing next time, and John Carter, you're the
By the
guy.
way, Councillor Brett Cowan is here. Do you mind if he has a little comment as well?
Absolutely.
This is everybody okay with that?
I want to acknowledge it's 9 o'clock, so if anyone has to go, if anyone.
Just a couple of short comments. The context has changed, and it's changed, and the grand context has changed a little bit, and it's changed like it was to recreate the situation that created Canada in the first place. When Canada was created, it was created because Britain withdrew its economic and military support of British North America, and everybody looked south at the million men in arms, the Civil War going on in the United States, and the West essentially undefended, very little structure of the West. And the fear was if Canada did not combine, if the colonies did not join together, that American expansionism and power, a million men in arms with something else to do, would come north and take over. So the impetus for creating Canada was this fear of the United States. Now, one thing we perhaps can thank Mr. Trump for is he's creating that exact same fear right now. And Mr. Legault and the government of Quebec now are suddenly faced with a whole different reality. They thought independence might be a great idea, but now they're realizing, whoa, if we're independent, we have Mr. Trump who's going to want to move in economically into Quebec. He's not going to listen to the Americans as they are now thinking. They're not going to be very sympathetic to anything about language. What's not English? You're trying to deny me the right to do business in Quebec because it's not in English? Forget it. That's the kind of fear that Mr. Legault now has to, and all of Quebec, now have to think a little bit about. And that puts us right back into the context of where there's 1867, where there's a possibility, perhaps, of rethinking our common future. One more point I wanted to make is I drafted the resolution that Pointe-Claire passed to protest against Bill 21. And then when I did that, I wanted to try to create language that would shame, if possible, shame the government of Quebec. And so I was going down to, I did some research on the Canadian Charter of Rights, and I could go down the list of rights that were being thrown out in favor of Bill 21. And in doing that, I said, well, I'd actually rather not use the Canadian Charter of Rights because Quebec hasn't actually signed on to it. So I looked at the Quebec Charter of Rights, and what did I discover? The Quebec Charter of Rights is pretty much the identical language of the Canadian Charter of Rights.
It was effectively the inspiration for the Canadian Charter.
Exactly. It was written before the Canadian Charter of Rights. And then I discovered something else which shocked the hell out of me. Bill 21, the same law, changed the Quebec Charter of Rights because it removed an inconvenient clause. So it erased Quebec rights that Quebec had defined for itself. And that blew me when I saw that. And I think that this is the kind of thing that the Quebec citizens, Quebecers don't know. It blows my mind that in the National Assembly, the opposition, nobody, I learned this because I researched it, but I never read about it in the newspapers. I never saw it on TV. I never heard a speech mentioning this. But Quebecers, we all know, many Quebecers from all walks of life, they have a sense of pride, a sense of shame. We just have to bring it up.
I thank you for those comments. I mean, the truth is, I think we're beyond shame. I think we have to have an amicable divorce if we're really going to push for it. You want policy? Here's policy. Let's support a referendum. Let's do it properly. Let's admit that there are different sets of values in this province, and some are incompatible. That there could be a perfectly fine, independent country that can worry about all those American concerns that we don't need to worry about. Because we're strong Canadians. We're not going to go quietly in the night, not for the U.S., and not for the separatist part of Quebec. That's just not going to happen. So we can get to policy, which actually is a lot easier once you purify the ground from this constant separatist nonsense. Let's talk education. You've got 20,000 unqualified teachers in the Francophone system, collapsing all educational quality. Where is the training program? You have this tit for tat going back and forth, shouldn't have unqualified teachers. Just train them. These are people who want to help teach kids. What are we doing? We don't prioritize that. Healthcare, you heard, at every step of the game, we have a system that is designed so the system does not work. And then on top of it, we barely have electronic medical records. And then when we attacked that, we did an inside tender to a sole source contractor during COVID.
You know, there's really easy things to do, Eric, but we can't even have a substantive debate about that, because if you even start to talk about that stuff, very quickly you're dragged into open language. And that's what we need to attack first, which is, hey, we've got some people in this province who don't care about the success of their people, or any program, or any government. They just care about language supremacy. And then we have the other 75, 80% that needs to talk pragmatically.
You got me, brother. You got me 100%. Policies to get elected, take care of these sectors.
Let's do it. What are we talking?
That's the challenge.
Yes.
Get elected. Everything else around that spectrum.
I'd like to
talk
talk
about
about
this policy, that policy. Put a platform to get elected.
Absolutely.
2 questions. We have a very important announcement to make, so either you can ask the questions after, or we have the announcement now.
And also it's late, so if anyone needs to go, please, don't hesitate, although it's really great to see everyone sticking around.
Joe, Colin, Curtis, Keith, thank you so much. Really appreciate that. And I want to address directly the man with the baseball cap and this man who say that priority number 1 is to get elected. What? What? Oh. Hello. Priority. I want to thank being up here, and I want to address what the man with the baseball cap said, and the other man who say priority number 1 is to get someone elected. I dream of Colin or Joe or Burtis standing on the National Assembly steps and in a scrum and refuting half of the bullshit that comes out every day. That would be my dream. Anyways, I'm a bit of a broken record. I'm going to make a suggestion I've made before, and it would embarrass Legault, and it could rally the other parties. I'm going to talk about, why don't you say, Legault proposed proportional representation, and he abandoned it. He said, no one cares about that, when he realized that the old system was working well for him. Just like Justin threw away his reform when he realized that the current system is working just fine. So, you could get the Conservatives who weren't unrepresented, the Solidaires who are about to disappear from the map again. You could have a common front with them on this issue. And you can say, hey, remember Francois when you wanted to do this? The one he was proposing was a good one, it was the German one. So I'm just saying that priority number 1 to get someone in Quebec City, that is a practical method. That's it.
I just want to say that as individuals, I think we can contribute. I understand this gentleman who says that when we see things that are unfair, that we show up. Because there's nothing more powerful than a group of people in the media to see them reacting. So if I'm too old to organize a rally, but if anybody else would, and I saw it on social media, I could bring 50 people here, and I'm sure everybody here would do the same thing.
We did that. I hope you showed that, and thank you if you did. About a few years ago, we had a rally, about 10,000 of us over at Dawson. So that was the last time I was interviewed on French press. I don't think they enjoyed a message. Julianne, why don't you come up and make her announcement?
Okay.
Hi, I'm Juliana Condensa. I've been at this for about 30 years. I love when people come and say you should do this and you should do that. We've been doing it, and what Keith Henderson said, I was there 30 years ago, so was Charles Wilburn. And we lived the day, and now we are passing baton to the new generation. And I'm very happy if all of you would like to help. Now you have other questions, you might think of something. We're going to have a Zoom in 2 weeks hence, just before Valentine, or maybe after Valentine. Which one do you want? Before Valentine?
After.
Or after Valentine? After. So we have a very important announcement to make, and I'm going to leave it to our leader, Colin. And just want to say that I met him 15 years ago, and he would come to McGill at our meetings for the Special Committee for Canadian Unity in a knapsack. He reminded me of Abraham Lincoln, and he was super quiet. And then he left, got his degrees, both comm and civil, became a part of the Ontario Bar. But it was when he had a job at Bay Street that he came charging, and he wanted to write him a C-13 that incorporates Bill 96, and he woke all of us up. He resurrected Keith. And I said, well,
I still want to be a little bit in the background. And here I am, this young man re-energized us, the movement, and what he has done together with Joe in the past 3 years is incredible. So I'm very happy that you're all here.
Yeah, thanks, Juliana. I guess alluding to, it was an email a few days ago, but it's my last appearance as co-leader, or family leader of the Canadian Party of Quebec. So passing the baton on to Murtis, who's been co-leader for, I think, almost 8 to 9 months, and then Joe, who's been there since the start of the task force and the party. And going to greener pastures, unfortunately, but trying to find employment in Quebec has not been easy, so leaving the province, but doing it for a job that hopefully I will love as a Crown prosecutor. So, so officially resigning as of this Saturday, I suppose. So, but the party's in good stead. Lots of money in the bank. I think a lot of you got my phone calls about donations, so make sure you all do. It is greatly appreciated, and it makes things happen. So a lot of money in the bank, war chest for the next election. We really have a great team. We have the executive committee, we have the board of directors, we have volunteers, we have all of you wonderful members and supporters. So really things are in a good place. I think the last 6-8 months of really great teams who work constructively together and are able to do great things, pull off events like this. Done it twice in the Eastern Townships, and then this in the last few months. So it's really been going well. And so be fighting for the next election, and certainly on electability. Certainly those comments are well taken, but certainly, I think I can only hope that the Canadian Party, on the principles behind me in the French language, will propel us forward. Truly a better day in Quebec is coming. So without further ado, it's my last appearance, but welcome to Murtis and Joe as the new co-leaders of the Canadian Party.
It's not a happy thing to see a 9th generation Université de Laval law school graduate have to leave the province after searching for a position for nearly 2 years in Quebec. But it is a reality. We're going to miss you terribly. You have invested an amount of your personal life, social life, professional life, economic life that, is probably not understood. I think a lot of people don't appreciate it on what it takes to build a party, to run 25 candidates in an election with no money, to get, through DGEQ approval processes with 7 weeks to the election, have nothing published, even though the writ hadn't been dropped. It's not been an easy 3 years for sure. And I remember us connecting before any of this existed and wondering if we were the only 2 people who could read anymore. It's scary. There are some scary things going on in terms of, call it what you want, social apathy, political convenience. But your leadership, both from the scholarly, legal perspective, as well as in terms of really bringing together different elements of the community, has been invaluable. So it's with the deepest and most heartfelt thanks that I accept. To co-lead this party with Murtis, who's been an amazing asset, and one of the people we found in our candidate push for the last election, who has shown every day why we're so lucky to be surrounded by people who share values and fight hard for them. And it all started with you. So thank you again.
So with that being said, I guess we're heading towards the end of the evening. Thank you all for coming out. Thanks for all the great speeches. If you could all maybe just remember to grab your plastic water bottles on the way. It's not the best idea for our environmental platform, but we're working on that one.
And we also got special permission to bring water bottles into the auditorium, so thank you, John Rainey officials.
Spread the word, please.
We'll be around a little bit too to chat if anyone wants to chat, but otherwise have a great night. Pleasure to meet you, and hope to meet you all personally in the coming months.
Easy.
photo. So I can turn this off, right?